The sun was just starting to rise over the Arizona desert when Maria opened her eyes. She could hear her father Thomas already moving around outside their small wooden house. The year was 1872, and their little ranch sat about 10 miles from Fort Verde. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple house, a small barn, and some fencing for their horses and cattle. Maria stretched and got out of bed. At 19, she had grown tired of this lonely life in the middle of nowhere. Every morning felt the same. Help her mother Elena with breakfast, take care of the animals, mend clothes, watch the endless desert stretch out in every direction. "Maria, come help me with this bread," her mother called from the kitchen. Elena had dark circles under her eyes. Life out here was hard on everyone, but especially on the women. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and sometimes they didn't see another soul for weeks. Thomas came in for breakfast, his boots dusty from checking the animals. He was a big man with rough hands and a thick beard. He used to be a soldier at the fort, but 3 years ago he decided to try ranching instead. "Maybe we can make something of this land," he always said. But Maria could see the worry in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Her little brother David sat at the table playing with his food. At 12 years old, he was getting restless too. He wanted to go to the fort and see the soldiers, but Thomas always said it was too dangerous to travel alone. "Papa, when can we go to town again?" Maria asked, cutting her bread into small pieces. She had been thinking about her old friend back east, a boy named William who used to write her letters. But it had been months since the last letter arrived. Thomas looked up from his coffee. "Not for a while, daughter. There's been trouble with the Apache lately. Colonel at the fort says they've been raiding farms to the south." Elena stopped stirring the pot and looked worried. "Maybe we should go stay at the fort for a while." "No," Thomas said firmly. "We're far enough out here. They won't bother us. Besides, I didn't leave the army just to go running back at the first sign of trouble." Maria had heard stories about the Apache. Some people said they were fierce warriors who could appear and disappear like ghosts in the desert. Others said they were just trying to protect their land. She didn't know what to believe, but the stories always made her feel uneasy. After breakfast, Maria went outside to feed the chickens. The morning air was cool, but she knew it would be blazing hot by noon. That's how it always was in the desert. She scattered corn for the chickens and watched them peck at the ground. David came running out of the house holding a wooden horse their father had carved for him. "Maria, want to play? We can pretend this horse is faster than any Apache pony." Maria smiled at her little brother. He was always so full of energy, even in this quiet place. "All right, but just for a little while. Mama needs help with the washing." They played by the old oak tree that gave their house some shade. David made galloping sounds as he ran around with his toy horse. Maria watched him and remembered when she used to play like that. Back then, everything seemed possible. She thought they would move back east someday, or maybe more people would come and build a real town nearby. But now she was getting older, and nothing ever seemed to change. Every day was exactly like the one before. Wake up, do chores, eat simple meals, go to bed when the sun went down. Sometimes she would sit outside at night and look at the stars, wondering if William back in Ohio was looking at the same stars and thinking about her. "Maria, what's that?" David suddenly stopped playing and pointed toward the hills in the distance. She looked where he was pointing but didn't see anything unusual. "Just rocks and desert bushes and the endless blue sky. I don't see anything. I thought I saw something moving, like people on horses." Maria felt a little chill even though the day was getting warm. "It's probably just wild horses. Come on, let's go inside. Mama's waiting for us." That afternoon, Thomas rode out to check on their cattle that grazed in a valley about 2 miles away. He took his rifle like he always did. Elena worked on mending a shirt while Maria helped with preparing vegetables for dinner. "Mama, do you ever miss home?" Maria asked, peeling potatoes. Elena looked up from her sewing. "Sometimes. But this is our home now. Your father thinks we can build something good here. But what if we can't? What if it's always going to be just us all alone out here?" Elena set down her needle and looked at her daughter with kind eyes. "Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan, Maria, but we make the best of what we have. And we have each other. That's more than many people can say." When Thomas came back that evening, he seemed more serious than usual. At dinner, he was quiet and kept looking toward the windows. "What's wrong, Papa?" David asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Found some tracks out by the south pasture. Unshod horse tracks. Could be wild horses, but..." He didn't finish, but they all understood. Apache horses didn't wear metal shoes like the horses white settlers used. Should we go to the fort? Elena asked again. Thomas shook his head. The tracks were old, probably from days ago. We'll just keep our eyes open and our rifles close. That night, Maria lay in bed listening to the sounds of the desert. Usually she found the cricket songs and owl calls comforting, but tonight every sound seemed threatening. She thought about the tracks her father had found. She thought about David pointing at something moving in the hills. Through her small window, she could see thousands of stars scattered across the dark sky. Somewhere out there, maybe William was getting ready for bed in his comfortable house in Ohio. Maybe he had forgotten all about the girl in Arizona who used to write him letters about her dreams of coming home. Maria closed her eyes and tried to imagine a different life, a life where she lived in a real town with real neighbors, a life where she didn't have to worry about Apache raids or endless desert or being alone with just her family for company. But this was her life. Tomorrow would be another day just like today. She would help her mother, play with David, and watch her father worry about things he didn't want to talk about. She had no way of knowing that this was the last normal night her family would ever have together. The attack came just as the sun was starting to rise. Maria was still in bed when she heard the first war cry echo across the desert. It was a sound unlike anything she had ever heard before, wild and fierce and terrifying. She sat up quickly, her heart already pounding. Through her small window, she could see dark figures on horseback moving fast toward their house. There had to be at least 6 or 7 of them, maybe more. "Thomas! Thomas, wake up!" Her mother's voice came from the next room, high and scared. Maria jumped out of bed and ran to her parents' room. Her father was already reaching for his rifle, still in his night clothes but moving fast. "Get David and go to the root cellar," he told Elena. His voice was calm, but Maria could see fear in his eyes. Now another war cry rang out, closer this time. Through the front window, Maria could see the raiders more clearly now. They were Apache warriors just like in the stories, but seeing them in real life was completely different. They moved like they were part of their horses, fast and smooth and dangerous. "Maria, come on." Elena grabbed her arm and pulled her toward David's room. David was already awake, sitting up in bed with his eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" "We have to go hide," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. Right now, Thomas was at the front window with his rifle. "There's too many of them," he said, more to himself than to his family. The root cellar was behind the house, built into the ground to keep vegetables cool during the hot summer months. Elena pushed David down the wooden steps and motioned for Maria to follow. "I'm not leaving, Papa," Maria said. "You have to," Elena said firmly. "Take care of your brother." But before Maria could argue, the front door exploded inward. 3 Apache warriors burst into the house, and suddenly everything was chaos and noise and terror. Thomas fired his rifle once, then twice. One of the warriors stumbled backward, but the others kept coming. Maria saw her father struggle with a tall warrior, who had a painted face and long black hair. They fought over the rifle, crashing into the kitchen table. "Run!" Thomas shouted. Elena pushed Maria toward the back door, but it was too late. 2 more warriors came around the house, blocking their escape. One of them was older than the others, with scars on his chest and arms that told stories of many battles. He had intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. This had to be their leader. When he spoke, the other warriors listened. He said something in Apache, pointing at the women. Maria pulled David behind her, trying to protect him. Her mother stood in front of both of them, even though she was shaking with fear. The fighting in the house had stopped. It was suddenly terribly quiet. The Apache leader looked at Maria with those sharp, intelligent eyes. He was probably in his 30s, with strong shoulders and the kind of presence that made it clear he was used to being in charge. When he spoke, his English was broken but understandable. "You come with us," he said to Maria. "No," Elena stepped forward. "Please, take anything you want, but leave my children alone." The leader ignored her and nodded to one of his warriors. The man grabbed Maria's arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't break free. "Please," Maria heard herself saying, even though she had promised herself she would be brave if something like this ever happened. "Please don't let them take me." The Apache leader studied her face for a long moment. Then he said something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. "She belongs to me. Mama." Maria reached out as the warrior pulled her toward the horses. Elena tried to follow, but another warrior stepped in front of her. In the confusion, Maria saw David slip away and run toward the root cellar. At least he would be safe. They put her on a horse behind one of the warriors. Maria had ridden horses before, but never like this. Never bareback at full speed across rough desert ground. She held on tight and tried not to fall off as they rode away from the only home she had ever known. Behind them, smoke was starting to rise from the house. Maria twisted around to look back and saw her mother standing in the yard, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. Elena looked so tiny and alone. The Apache warriors didn't talk much as they rode. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, following paths through the desert that Maria couldn't even see. The leader rode ahead of the group, sometimes standing up in his stirrups to scan the horizon. After what felt like hours, they stopped to rest the horses near some rocks that provided a little shade. Maria's legs were shaking when they helped her down from the horse. She had never been so scared or so tired in her life. The leader came over to where she was sitting. Up close, she could see that his face wasn't painted for war like some of the others. He had kind eyes, which surprised her. She had expected all Apache warriors to look cruel and savage. "What is your name?" he asked in his careful English. Maria didn't answer at first. She was still trying to process what had happened. Her father was probably dead. Her mother might be hurt. David was hiding in the root cellar, terrified and alone. "My name," the Apache repeated patiently. "Maria," she finally whispered. He nodded. "I am called Stone Bear. You are safe with us." "Safe?" Maria almost laughed, but she was too scared to make any sound. She was a prisoner. Her family was probably dead. How could she possibly be safe? But as she looked around at the other warriors, she noticed something unexpected. They weren't looking at her like she was just something they had stolen. One of the younger ones even offered her water from his leather pouch. Stone Bear said something in Apache to his men. They nodded and started preparing to move again. "Why?" Maria asked him. "Why did you take me?" Stone Bear looked at her with those intelligent eyes. For a moment she thought he might actually answer. But then he just said, "You will understand." They rode for the rest of the day, deeper and deeper into country Maria had never seen before. The desert here was different, more rocks and hidden valleys, places where a group of people could disappear completely. As the sun started to set, Maria realized she was farther from home than she had ever been in her life, and she had no idea if she would ever see her family again. But something strange was happening. Even though she was terrified, even though she didn't know what was going to happen to her, she noticed that the Apache warriors weren't treating her badly. They shared their water with her. When she started to fall off the horse from exhaustion, they slowed down. Stone Bear kept looking back at her during the ride, and she could see something in his expression that wasn't cruelty or anger. She didn't know what it was yet, but it gave her the smallest bit of hope that maybe somehow she might survive this. The second day of traveling was worse than the first. Maria's whole body hurt from riding for so long. Her legs were raw from gripping the horse, her back ached, and her lips were cracked from the dry desert air. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the thoughts that kept spinning through her mind. Was her father really dead? Was her mother hurt? Had anyone found David in the root cellar? The questions never stopped, and she had no way to get answers. They were traveling through country she had never seen before. The desert here was full of strange rock formations that looked like giant fingers pointing at the sky. Hidden canyons appeared suddenly between hills, and Maria realized how easy it would be for people to disappear in this landscape forever. Stone Bear rode beside her sometimes, watching her with those careful eyes. She still couldn't figure him out. He didn't seem like the savage warrior from the stories people told. When she stumbled while walking during a rest stop, he steadied her arm gently. When she couldn't eat the dried meat they offered her, he didn't get angry, but he was still the man who had taken her from her family. She couldn't forget that. On the morning of the third day, Maria decided she had to try to escape. They were camped near a stream, and the warriors were busy watering their horses. She waited until most of them were looking the other way, then quietly slipped behind some large rocks. Her plan was simple: follow the stream back the way they had come. Streams had to lead somewhere, maybe back toward the fort. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. She made it about a mile before she heard horses behind her. She tried to run, but her legs were too weak from 3 days of hard travel. Stone Bear rode up beside her and jumped down from his horse. Maria expected him to be angry, but his voice was calm. "Where do you think you can go?" "Home," she said, even though she knew it was useless. Stone Bear looked around at the empty desert stretching in every direction. Home is many days' ride. You have no water, no food, no horse. The sun will kill you before you go 10 miles. Maria knew he was right, but she lifted her chin and tried to look brave. I don't care. Something that might have been a smile crossed Stone Bear's face. You have spirit. That is good. But do not waste it on dying in the desert. He helped her back onto his horse, but not roughly. As they rode back to the camp, Maria found herself paying attention to how he moved, how he sat his horse like he had been born on it. She had grown up around horses, but she had never seen anyone ride like this. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. Stone Bear was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, My people have rules about prisoners. You are under my protection now. Your people? Maria had heard the word Apache used like it meant one big tribe, but she was starting to think it was more complicated than that. Chiricahua, Stone Bear said. We are Chiricahua Apache. That afternoon, they started climbing into mountains Maria didn't know existed. The trail was narrow and rocky, winding between tall cliffs that blocked out most of the sky. The air was cooler here, and Maria could smell pine trees somewhere up ahead. The other warriors seemed to relax as they climbed higher. They talked more among themselves, sometimes laughing at jokes Maria couldn't understand. One of the younger ones, who looked like he might be about her age, kept glancing at her curiously. Stone Bear noticed her watching the young warrior. That is Running Wolf. He has never seen a white woman before. How old is he? 17 summers. He is my sister's son. Maria was surprised. She hadn't thought about these men having families, having sisters and nephews and normal lives. In all the stories she had heard, Apache were just dangerous enemies, not real people with relatives who cared about them. Do you have children? She asked. Stone Bear's face changed, becoming sadder. I had a son. He died last winter from the coughing sickness. Maria felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. She had seen what the coughing sickness could do. It had killed several people at Fort Verde the year before. I'm sorry. Stone Bear nodded but didn't say anything else. As they rode deeper into the mountains, Maria started to understand why the Apache had been able to avoid the army for so long. This country was like a maze. Every canyon looked the same, and the trails split and divided in ways that would confuse anyone who didn't know them perfectly. They camped that night in a hidden valley surrounded by tall cliffs. There was grass for the horses and a small spring for water. The warriors built a fire and shared their food. More dried meat, some kind of bread made from corn, and berries they had gathered along the way. Maria sat apart from the group, still feeling like a prisoner even though no one was guarding her directly. Where could she run in this maze of canyons? Running Wolf approached her with a piece of bread. He said something in Apache and held it out to her. He wants to know if you are hungry, Stone Bear translated. Maria took the bread and nodded her thanks. Running Wolf smiled and said something else. He says you ride well for a white woman. Despite everything, Maria found herself almost smiling. Tell him thank you. The exchange seemed to break some kind of ice with the other warriors. They started talking to Stone Bear, who would sometimes translate parts of their conversation for Maria. Greyhawk says your hair is like sunlight. Broken. Arrow wants to know if all white women are as tall as you. Fast Horse thinks you must be brave because you have not cried. Maria realized they were curious about her the same way she was curious about them. They had probably heard as many strange stories about white people as she had heard about Apache. That night, lying under more stars than she had ever seen in her life, Maria thought about her situation. She was probably 3 days' ride from home, in country she could never navigate alone. Her family might be dead and she might never see them again. But something unexpected was happening. These Apache warriors weren't the monsters from the stories. They were just men with families and feelings and their own reasons for doing what they did. Stone Bear had lost a son. Running Wolf had never seen a white woman before. They shared their food and water with her, and they treated her with a strange kind of respect. She was still their prisoner. She still wanted to go home, but for the first time since the attack, she began to think that maybe, somehow, she might actually survive this. Tomorrow they would reach wherever they were going, and then she would find out what Stone Bear meant when he said she belonged to him. The Apache village was hidden so well that Maria didn't see it until they were almost inside it. They had ridden through what looked like a solid wall of rock but turned out to be a narrow passage between two cliffs. On the other side was a valley that seemed cut off from the rest of the world. About 20 traditional dwellings called wickiups were scattered around the valley floor. They were dome-shaped structures made from wooden poles covered with brush and animal skins. Smoke drifted up from several of them, and Maria could smell cooking food that made her stomach growl with hunger. People came out to greet the returning warriors. Children ran alongside the horses, laughing and calling out in Apache. Women emerged from the wiki-ups, some smiling, others looking at Maria with suspicious eyes. An elderly woman with silver hair and a face marked by years in the desert sun walked slowly toward them. She carried herself with the kind of dignity that made it clear she was important in this community. When she spoke to Stone Bear, her voice was firm and questioning. "My mother wants to know why you brought a white woman here," Stone Bear said to Maria as he helped her down from the horse. Maria looked at the old woman, who was studying her with sharp, intelligent eyes that reminded her of Stone Bear's. "What should I tell her?" "Tell her your name. Show respect." Maria tried to stand up straight despite her exhaustion. "My name is Maria," she said, not knowing if the woman understood English. The old woman nodded slowly, then said something in Apache that sounded like a question. "She wants to know if you can work," Stone Bear translated. "Yes," Maria said immediately. "I can cook and sew and take care of animals." The old woman spoke again, longer this time, and Stone Bear's expression grew more serious as he listened. "She says you can stay in her wiki-up until we decide what to do with you. But you must earn your food and water like everyone else here, and if you try to run away, you will die in the desert." Maria nodded. She was too tired to argue, and she had already learned that escaping would be impossible. Stone Bear's mother led her to a wiki-up near the center of the village. Inside, it was dim and cool, with woven mats on the ground and baskets hanging from the wooden frame. A fire pit in the center had stones arranged around it, and there was a hole at the top to let smoke escape. The old woman gestured for Maria to sit, then brought her a bowl of water and what looked like some kind of stew. Maria drank the water gratefully. It was the first clean, cool water she'd had in days. The stew was made with meat and corn and herbs she didn't recognize, but it tasted better than anything she could remember eating. "Thank you," Maria said. The old woman nodded and said something that sounded almost gentle. Then she left Maria alone to rest. Maria curled up on one of the woven mats and fell asleep almost immediately. She slept for hours, dreamless and deep, her body finally able to relax after 3 days of fear and constant movement. When she woke up, it was evening and she could hear voices and laughter from outside. The old woman was sitting by the fire, working on what looked like a basket made from thin strips of wood and plant fibers. "You are awake," the woman said in careful English. Maria sat up, surprised. "You speak English?" "Some. I learned from soldiers at the fort many years ago." The woman's voice was rough but kind. "My name is Mountain Flower. I am Stone Bear's mother. Where is Stone Bear?" "Meeting with the men. They decide what to do about the soldiers who will come looking for you." Maria's heart jumped. "Soldiers are coming?" Mountain Flower nodded. "Always soldiers come when white people are taken, but they will not find this place." Over the next few days, Maria began to learn how life worked in the Apache village. She woke up with the sun and helped Mountain Flower with daily tasks. They gathered wood for the fire, prepared food, and worked on various crafts. Maria discovered that Apache women were skilled at many things she had never learned. They could weave baskets so tightly they held water. They knew which desert plants were good for medicine and which ones were good for food. They could prepare deer hide so it became soft and comfortable to wear. Mountain Flower was patient with her but demanding. When Maria made mistakes, the old woman would show her the correct way once, then expect her to remember. When Maria worked hard and did well, Mountain Flower would nod approvingly but rarely offered praise. The other women in the village were slower to accept her. Some ignored her completely. Others watched her with suspicious eyes as if they expected her to cause trouble. But gradually a few began to warm up to her. There was Dawnlight, a woman about her mother's age who had 3 young children. She was kind but cautious, speaking to Maria in simple Apache words and gesturing to help her understand. There was also Stone Bear's sister, Singing Bird, who was only a few years older than Maria. She was Running Wolf's mother, and she seemed curious about Maria's life before the raid. "Did you have a husband?" Singing Bird asked one day as they worked together preparing corn for grinding. "No," Maria said, "but I had a friend, a young man back east who wanted to marry me." Singing Bird looked puzzled. "Back east? Where is that?" Maria tried to explain about Ohio, about green fields and cities with many people and houses made of wood and brick. But as she described her old life, it seemed increasingly distant and unreal. Had she really once lived in a place where you could walk to neighbors' houses, where letters arrived regularly and young ladies worried about what dress to wear to church? Do you miss him? Singing Bird asked about William. Maria thought about it. I thought I would, but I haven't thought about him much since I got here. That was true, and it surprised her. William and her dreams of returning east had seemed so important just a week ago. Now they felt like something from a different person's life. Stone Bear came to check on her progress every few days. He would talk with his mother in Apache, then ask Maria how she was adjusting. Your mother is a good teacher, Maria told him, but the other women don't trust me. Trust must be earned, Stone Bear said. Show them you are not their enemy. Am I their enemy? Stone Bear studied her face. That depends on you. After 2 weeks in the village, Maria had her first real test. Dawnlight's youngest child, a little boy about 3 years old, fell badly and cut his leg on a sharp rock. The wound was deep and bleeding heavily, and Dawnlight was crying as she tried to stop the bleeding with strips of cloth. Maria had helped her mother treat injuries before, back on the ranch. She knew that pressure and elevation would help stop bleeding, and that certain plants could prevent infection. Let me help, she told Dawnlight. Dawnlight looked at her uncertainly, then at Mountain Flower, who nodded. Maria pressed firmly on the wound while Dawnlight held her son still. The little boy was crying, but the bleeding started to slow. Then Maria remembered seeing a plant growing near the stream that looked like something her mother had used for cleaning wounds. Mountain Flower. There's a plant by the water. Green leaves, small white flowers. My mother used it for cuts. Mountain Flower's eyes lit up with understanding. She sent Running Wolf to gather the plant, and together the women cleaned the wound and made a poultice to prevent infection. The little boy's leg healed cleanly, with no signs of the dangerous infections that could kill people on the frontier. After that, the women's attitude toward Maria began to change. They started including her in their conversations, teaching her more Apache words, and showing her the subtle skills that made life possible in the desert. Maria learned to identify edible plants and to prepare them so they tasted good. She learned to make thread from plant fibers and to sew with needles made from cactus spines. She learned to read the weather by watching clouds and feeling changes in the wind. Most importantly, she learned that the Apache were not the savage warriors from the stories white people told. They were families trying to survive in a harsh land, taking care of their children and elders, following traditions that had kept them alive for generations. But she also learned about the anger and sadness that lived in this community. She heard stories about relatives killed by soldiers, about children taken to government schools and never seen again, about sacred places destroyed by miners and settlers. Stone Bear had a 6-year-old son named Little Fox from his first wife, who had died in childbirth. The boy was quiet and serious, but he began to warm up to Maria after she helped heal Dawnlight's child. Will you teach me English words? He asked her one day. Maria looked at Stone Bear, who was sitting nearby making arrows. He nodded permission. What do you want to learn? Maria asked. Words for animals. I want to know what you call the creatures we hunt. So Maria began teaching Little Fox English, and in return he helped her learn more Apache. It was a fair trade, and it gave her something to look forward to each day. But at night, lying in Mountain Flower's wickiup and listening to the sounds of the desert, Maria still thought about her family. She wondered if David was safe, if her mother had survived, if anyone was still looking for her. She was learning to live as an Apache woman, but part of her heart still belonged to the life she had lost. She didn't know it yet, but that divided loyalty would soon become the most difficult challenge she had ever faced. 6 months had passed since Maria arrived in the Hidden Valley, and she could barely recognize the person she had become. Her skin was darker from the desert sun, her hands were rough from constant work, and she could understand most conversations in Apache. More surprising was that she had started thinking in Apache sometimes, especially when she was working with her hands. The other women in the village now treated her as one of them. Dawnlight often asked for her help with her children, and Singing Bird had become something like a real friend. Even the older women who had been most suspicious of her now nodded respectfully when they passed, but the biggest change was in how Stone Bear looked at her. It had happened gradually, so slowly that Maria didn't notice it at first. He had started checking on her more often, asking not just about her work but about how she felt, if she was happy, if she needed anything. When she got sick with a fever that lasted 3 days, he brought her special tea made from roots his mother had gathered in the mountains. "You don't have to take care of me," Maria had told him. "I'm not your responsibility." Stone Bear had looked at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. "Yes, you are," he said quietly. The way he said it made something flutter in Maria's chest that she didn't want to think about too carefully. One evening in late summer, Stone Bear came to Mountain Flower's wickiup while Maria was helping prepare dinner. He spoke to his mother in Apache for several minutes, and Maria caught enough words to understand they were talking about her. "Stone Bear wants to speak with you alone," Mountain Flower told her. "Go walk with him." Maria's heart started beating faster as she followed Stone Bear out of the village and up a trail that led to a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and red that still took her breath away after all these months. "You have been with us for half a year," Stone Bear said when they stopped walking. "Yes. Do you still think about leaving?" Maria was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. "Sometimes. I think about my family. I wonder if they're alive, if they're looking for me. And if you could leave tomorrow. If soldiers came and offered to take you back to your people." Maria looked out at the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. 6 months ago, the answer would have been simple. Of course she would want to leave. But now, "I don't know," she said honestly. Stone Bear moved closer to her. "I need to tell you something. About why I took you from your family." Maria felt her stomach tighten. She had wondered about this for months but had been afraid to ask directly. "My first wife died 3 winters ago," Stone Bear said. "Little Fox was only 3 years old.
He needed a mother, and
I was very lonely. The old women in the village kept telling me I should choose a new wife, but none of the young women felt right to me." He paused, looking out at the sunset. "Then I saw you that morning at your family's ranch. The way you protected your little brother. The way you stood up to me even though you were afraid. I thought, here is a woman with the kind of strength my son needs. The kind of strength I need." Maria stared at him. "You took me to be your wife? I hoped you might choose to be my wife someday when you understood our ways better. When you knew that I would treat you with honor. But you never said anything. For 6 months you never. I wanted you to have time to heal from losing your family. I wanted you to see that our people are not monsters. That life with us could be good. I did not want you to agree to marriage because you were afraid or because you felt trapped." Maria's mind was spinning. Everything that had happened, the kindness from Mountain Flower, the way the other women had gradually accepted her, Stone Bear's gentle patience, it all made sense now. "What if I said no?" she asked. "Then you would stay in my mother's wickiup as her adopted daughter. No one would force you to do anything against your will. But Little Fox would be disappointed. He has grown very fond of you." That was true. The little boy followed Maria around whenever he could, chattering in a mixture of English and Apache, showing her interesting rocks he found or asking her to tell him stories about the strange world where white people lived. "And you?" Maria asked. "Would you be disappointed?" Stone Bear looked directly into her eyes. "Yes, I would be very disappointed." There was something in his voice that made Maria's heart race. She had seen how Stone Bear treated his mother, his sister, his son, with respect and gentleness and real affection. She had watched him with the other people in the village and seen that he was not just a war leader, but someone people came to for advice, someone they trusted to make difficult decisions. In her old life, she had dreamed of marrying William, a boy she had known since childhood. It would have been a safe, predictable marriage in a safe, predictable town. But William had never looked at her the way Stone Bear was looking at her now, like she was the most important person in his world. "I need time to think," she said. Stone Bear nodded. "Take all the time you need." But as they walked back to the village, Maria realized she had already made her decision. She just needed to be honest with herself about it. Over the next few weeks, she paid more attention to how she felt when Stone Bear was around. She noticed that she looked forward to his visits, that she found excuses to be where he might see her, that she felt proud when he praised her progress in learning Apache ways. She also noticed how he interacted with Little Fox. He was patient but firm, teaching the boy to ride and hunt and take care of himself. When Little Fox had bad dreams about his mother who died, Stone Bear would sit with him and sing quiet songs until he fell back asleep. This was a man who knew how to love people and take care of them. And despite everything that had happened, despite the fact that he had taken her from her family, Maria found herself falling in love with him. The realization scared her. How could she love the man who had destroyed her old life? What did that say about the kind of person she was? But then she would remember the morning of the raid, how Stone Bear could have let his warriors treat her badly, how he could have forced her to do things against her will. Instead, he had protected her and given her time to choose her own path. One evening, as she was teaching Little Fox new English words, the boy looked up at her with his father's intelligent eyes and asked, "Will you be my new mother?" Maria's heart ached. "What makes you ask that?" "My grandmother says my father wants to marry you. She says you would be a good mother because you take care of people when they're hurt." Maria looked across the fire where Stone Bear was talking with some of the other men. As if he felt her watching, he turned and met her eyes. In that moment, she knew that her old life was truly over. She could never go back to being the girl who had dreamed of a simple life in Ohio. She had become someone new, someone who belonged in this harsh, beautiful desert with these strong, complex people. "I think I would like that very much," she told Little Fox. The boy's face lit up with joy, and he ran to whisper something excitedly to his grandmother. Mountain Flower looked over at Maria and smiled the first truly warm smile she had ever given her. That night, Maria told Stone Bear her decision. They were married 3 days later, in a ceremony that was nothing like the church wedding she had once imagined, but felt more meaningful than anything she had ever experienced. As Stone Bear's wife, Maria's position in the village changed again. She was no longer a captive or even a guest. She was family, with all the responsibilities and protections that came with it. But she was also falling deeper in love with a man whose people were at war with her people, and she had no idea how much that would matter until the day her two worlds finally collided. 300 miles away from the hidden Apache village, David Mitchell was no longer the frightened 12-year-old boy who had hidden in the root cellar while his sister was taken. 2 years of grief and anger had changed him into someone harder, older than his 14 years should have allowed. He lived at Fort Verde now, in a small room behind the blacksmith shop. Colonel Harrison had taken pity on the orphaned boy and given him work helping around the fort. But everyone who knew David could see that he was consumed by one single purpose: finding his sister. "She's probably dead, son," Colonel Harrison had told him gently many times. "It's been 2 years. Apache don't usually keep white prisoners alive that long." But David refused to believe it. He had spent that terrible day hiding in the cellar, listening to the sounds of fighting and then the awful silence that followed. He had seen his mother's body when the soldiers finally arrived. He had helped bury his father. But Maria's body had never been found, which meant she might still be alive somewhere. Every morning, David woke up thinking about his sister. Every night, he fell asleep planning ways to find her. He had learned to track animals in the desert. He had convinced some of the older scouts to teach him to read Apache sign. He could ride and shoot better than most of the soldiers at the fort. And he had made a friend, Jake Morrison, an old mountain man who scouted for the army. Jake was probably 50 years old, with gray hair and scars that told stories of a hard life spent in dangerous places. He had been tracking Apache for 20 years and knew their ways better than almost any white man alive. "That sister of yours," Jake said one evening as they sat by the fire outside the fort. "If she's still alive after all this time, there's a reason for it." "What do you mean?" Jake spit tobacco juice into the fire, where it hissed and steamed. "Apache don't keep prisoners just for the fun of it. If they've kept her this long, it's because she's useful to them somehow. Maybe she's learned their ways. Maybe she's even—" He stopped himself. "Maybe she's what?" Jake looked uncomfortable. "Son, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your sister might not want to be rescued. I've seen it before. White women taken by Indians, after a few years they don't remember how to live like white folks anymore." David felt anger rise in his chest. "You don't know Maria. She would never choose to stay with the people who killed our parents." "I hope you're right," Jake said quietly. "But people change when they have to survive. Your sister's been gone for 2 years. That's long enough to become somebody completely different." Despite Jake's warnings, David never stopped believing that Maria was waiting for him to rescue her. He volunteered for every patrol that went into Apache country. He studied maps until he knew every canyon and water source for 100 miles around. He learned to speak basic Apache from a captured warrior who was held at the fort for a few months. The captured warrior, an old man named Crow Feather, was curious about why this young white boy was so determined to learn his language. "I'm looking for my sister," David told him in broken Apache. "She was taken by your people." Crow Feather studied David's face carefully. What did she look like, this sister? Tall, with light brown hair and green eyes. She was 19 when they took her. The old Apache was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Many white women have been taken over the years. Most do not survive. But if yours has lived this long, she has learned to be Apache. She has probably forgotten she was ever white." "No," David said firmly. "Maria would never forget our family." Crow Feather shook his head. "You do not understand. When someone joins our people, truly joins us, they become Apache in their hearts. The person they were before dies and a new person is born." These conversations only made David more determined. If Maria was alive, if she had somehow survived 2 years with the Apache, then she needed him to bring her home before she forgot who she really was. His chance finally came when a new commanding officer arrived at Fort Verde. Colonel James Parker was younger than Harrison and more aggressive in his approach to dealing with the Apache problem. He believed in pursuing war parties into their own territory instead of just defending settlements. "We need to hit them where they live," Parker announced at his first staff meeting. "Show them that nowhere is safe for raiders and kidnappers." David immediately volunteered to join Parker's first expedition into the Superstition Mountains. At 14, he was younger than any regular soldier, but his tracking skills and knowledge of Apache ways made him valuable. "You sure you can handle this, boy?" Parker asked. "We're going into country where white men don't usually come back from." "My sister is out there somewhere," David said. "I've been waiting 2 years for a chance like this." The expedition consisted of 20 soldiers, including David and Jake Morrison. They rode out at dawn on a cool October morning, following trails that led deeper into Apache territory than any Army patrol had gone in years. For 5 days, they found nothing but old campsites and cold trails. The Apache seemed to disappear into the landscape like ghosts. David started to worry that they would return to the fort empty-handed, like so many patrols before them. But on the 6th day, Jake found fresh tracks near a water source. "Unshod ponies," he said, kneeling beside the prints in the mud. 5 or 6 horses, maybe more. "And look here." He pointed to a smaller track. "That's a woman's moccasin. Small feet." David's heart raced. Could it be her? "Could be anybody," Jake said. But there was something in his voice that suggested he thought it might be significant. Colonel Parker decided to follow the tracks. They led higher into the mountains, through country so rough that the soldiers had to lead their horses on foot most of the time. The trail was difficult to follow, but Jake's experienced eyes could read sign that the others would have missed. On the 7th day, they found the hidden passage between the cliffs. "This is it," Jake whispered, studying the narrow gap between the rock walls. "There's a settlement in there somewhere. I can smell wood smoke." Colonel Parker gathered his men around him. "We go in quiet. No shooting unless they started. We're looking for prisoners, not a fight." But as they prepared to enter the hidden valley, David felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. After 2 years of searching, he was finally close to finding Maria. But what if Jake was right? What if she had changed so much that she wouldn't want to come home? What if the sister he was trying to save no longer existed? The thought terrified him more than the possibility of facing Apache warriors. He had built his entire life around the goal of rescuing Maria. If she didn't want to be rescued, then who was he? What was the point of everything he had done? But it was too late to turn back now. Whatever he found in that hidden valley, whatever his sister had become, he would finally know the truth. And maybe, if he was lucky, he could still save her, even if she had forgotten that she needed saving. Maria woke up feeling sick again. It was the 4th morning in a row, and she knew what it meant even before Mountain Flower looked at her with knowing eyes. "How long since your moon time?" the old woman asked gently. Maria counted in her head. It had been almost 3 months since she had married Stone Bear. 2 months, she whispered. Mountain Flower smiled, the kind of smile that held generations of women's wisdom. "You carry Stone Bear's child." The news should have filled Maria with joy. She loved Stone Bear, and she had seen how wonderful he was with Little Fox. She knew he would be a good father to this new baby. But instead of joy, she felt a crushing weight of confusion and guilt. She was carrying the child of an Apache warrior. What did that make her? What did that make the baby? When Stone Bear returned from a hunting trip that evening, Maria told him the news privately, away from the rest of the village. His face lit up with a happiness she had never seen before. "A child," he said, pulling her close. "Our child. Are you happy?" Maria asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I have never been happier," Stone Bear said. "Little Fox will have a brother or sister. My mother will have another grandchild to spoil. And you," he touched her face gently, "you will be the mother of my children. There is no greater honor." That night, lying in their wickiup with Stone Bear's arm around her, Maria should have felt safe and content. Instead, her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control. Her child would be half Apache, half white. In the white world, that would make the baby an outcast. In the Apache world, it would make the child fully Apache. But what did it make her? Was she still Maria Mitchell from Arizona Territory? Or had she truly become someone new? Her answer came 2 weeks later, in the most terrible way possible. Stone Bear had been gone for 3 days with a war party, raiding a supply train that was carrying rifles to another fort. Maria tried not to think too much about what that meant, that her husband was fighting against soldiers who might be men she had known at Fort Verde, that he was taking weapons that were meant to protect white settlers like her family had been. The war party returned at sunset, whooping and celebrating their success. They had captured a dozen rifles and a lot of ammunition without losing a single man, but their celebration was cut short when Fast Horse rode hard into the village, his horse lathered with sweat. "Soldiers," he gasped, "coming from the south." "Many soldiers." Stone Bear's face went hard. "How many?" 20, maybe more. They found the hidden trail. The village erupted into controlled chaos. The Apache had planned for this possibility. Within minutes, the women were packing essential items while the men gathered their weapons. Children were rounded up and given to the older women to watch. "We move to the winter camp," Stone Bear announced. "Everyone knows the way. We leave in 10 minutes, but 10 minutes wasn't enough time." Before half the village had finished packing, they could hear horses in the narrow passage between the cliffs. The soldiers had found them. "Take Maria and go," Stone Bear told his mother. "Use the north trail." "I won't leave you," Maria said. Stone Bear looked at her with fierce eyes. "You carry my child. You must survive." Before Maria could argue further, the first gunshots rang out. The soldiers had reached the village. What followed was chaos and terror beyond anything Maria had experienced, even during the raid on her family's ranch. Apache warriors fired from behind rocks and wickiups while soldiers charged into the village on horseback. Women screamed as they tried to protect their children. The air filled with gun smoke and dust and the sound of people dying. Maria found herself caught between two worlds in the most literal way possible. She could see soldiers, young men who might have been from Fort Verde, who might have known her father. But she could also see Apache families being torn apart, children crying in terror as their parents fell. She saw Dawn Light get shot while trying to carry her youngest child to safety. The little boy Maria had helped heal months ago fell beside his mother, blood spreading across his small chest. She saw Running Wolf, Stone Bear's 17-year-old nephew, take a bullet in the shoulder but keep fighting to protect the other young people trying to escape. And through it all, she could hear Stone Bear and his warriors fighting desperately to give their families time to get away. "Maria!" The voice cut through all the chaos and noise. Maria turned and saw a soldier running toward her. Not a soldier, a boy. A boy who looked familiar. "Maria, it's me. It's David." Maria's world stopped. Her little brother, the 12-year-old who had hidden in the root cellar while she was taken, was now almost as tall as she was, wearing a cavalry uniform and carrying a rifle. "David?" she whispered. He reached her and grabbed her arm. "Come on, we have to get out of here. I've been looking for you for 2 years." Maria looked at her brother's face, older and harder than it should have been at 14, and she saw the same determination that had driven her to survive among the Apache. He had come to rescue her, just like she had always hoped. But as he tried to pull her toward the soldiers' horses, Maria realized something that broke her heart. She didn't want to be rescued. "David, stop. I can't go with you." "Huh? What?" "Maria, what are you talking about?" "These people killed our parents. They kidnapped you." "It's not that simple," Maria said, trying to make him understand while gunfire continued around them. "What do you mean it's not simple? You're my sister. You're white. You belong with your own people." Maria looked around at the village being destroyed, at Apache families dying, at the life she had built being torn apart. "These are my people now, David. I'm married. I'm going to have a baby." The look of horror and disbelief on David's face was worse than any physical pain Maria had ever felt. "No," he said. "No, that's not possible. You're confused. You've been their prisoner so long you don't remember who you really are." A bullet whined past them, and David instinctively pushed Maria behind a large rock. In that moment of protection, Maria saw her little brother clearly, still trying to take care of her, still believing he could fix everything, still the same boy who had hidden in the cellar while their world fell apart. "I remember everything," she said gently. "I remember Mama and Papa. I remember you. I remember our life before. But I also remember the last 2 years. I've learned to love these people, David. I've learned to see them as human beings, not as monsters. They killed our parents. Yes, they did. And soldiers have killed Apache mothers and fathers. Apache children. There's been so much killing, David. So much pain on both sides." David stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. To him, she probably was. The gunfire was moving away from them as the surviving Apache retreated deeper into the canyon. Soon the soldiers would regroup and start looking for prisoners and survivors. "Please," David said, his voice breaking. "Please come home with me. I've spent 2 years looking for you. I've learned to track and shoot and fight, all so I could bring you home." Maria felt tears running down her face. She could see the boy her brother had been and the hard young man he had become. She could see how much he had sacrificed to find her, how much he loved her. But she could also see Stone Bear fighting at the far end of the village, trying to protect his people. She could see Little Fox hiding behind his grandmother, terrified and looking around for Maria. She could feel the new life growing inside her, the child who would be born Apache. "I am home," she said quietly. David looked at her like she had stabbed him in the heart. The choice she had to make was impossible: stay with the people who had become her family, or return to the brother who had never stopped loving her. Save her Apache child or save her white brother from the pain of losing her forever. But as the sounds of battle grew closer again, Maria realized that the choice might be taken away from her entirely. Because in war, sometimes nobody gets to choose who lives and who dies. Sometimes everyone loses everything, no matter how much they love each other. The pain hit Maria like lightning, doubling her over behind the rock where she and David were hiding. At first she thought it was fear or shock from the battle raging around them. Then she felt warm wetness between her legs and realized with terror that the baby was coming. "Something's wrong," she gasped, grabbing David's arm. Her brother looked at her in confusion, then saw the pain in her face and the blood on her dress. Even at 14, he had lived on the frontier long enough to recognize what was happening. "The baby," Maria whispered. "It's too early." "The baby's coming." David's face went white. He looked around desperately at the chaos surrounding them. Apache warriors still fighting at the edges of the village, soldiers regrouping for another assault, smoke and dust and the cries of wounded people filling the air. "We have to get you to safety," he said. But before they could move, Stone Bear appeared around the side of the rock. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his shirt torn by a bullet that had barely missed him. When he saw Maria on the ground clutching her belly, his fierce warrior expression melted into fear. "The child?" he asked in English. Maria could only nod, another wave of pain making it impossible to speak. Stone Bear immediately knelt beside her, his hands gentle despite their urgency. Then he noticed David, still holding his rifle but not pointing it at anyone. The two men looked at each other across Maria's pain. The Apache war chief and the white boy who had grown up planning revenge. David was young, but Stone Bear could see the hardness in his eyes, the way he held his weapon like someone who knew how to use it. "You are her brother," Stone Bear said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," David replied, his voice tight with hatred and confusion. Stone Bear nodded slowly. "She has told me about you. About how you hid in the root cellar. About how you survived. I survived so I could find her, so I could bring her home." Another contraction hit Maria, stronger than before. She cried out and both men immediately focused on her instead of each other. "We need to move her somewhere safe," Stone Bear said. "The baby will not wait for this fighting to end." David looked at the Apache warrior who had stolen his sister, who had married her, who had gotten her pregnant. Every instinct told him to shoot this man and take Maria back to the soldiers. But he could see that Maria was in real danger, that she needed help more than she needed rescue. "There's a cave," David said reluctantly, "about a quarter-mile north of here. The soldiers haven't found it yet." Stone Bear studied the boy's face, seeing the internal battle David was fighting. "You will help us?" "I'll help her," David said firmly. "Not you." But when Stone Bear lifted Maria in his arms, David took her legs to help carry her. Together they moved through the shadows between the rocks, avoiding both soldiers and Apache warriors, carrying the woman they both loved toward whatever safety they could find. The cave was small, but dry, hidden behind a cluster of boulders that made it almost invisible. Stone Bear laid Maria down gently on his shirt, which he had torn off to make a cushion for her. "Water," he said to David. "She needs water." David had a canteen, which he handed over without argument. Stone Bear helped Maria drink, speaking to her softly in Apache, his voice full of tenderness that made David's chest ache with confusion. "How long have you been married?" David asked, the words coming out harder than he intended. 6 months, Stone Bear replied, not taking his eyes off Maria. "And you're happy?" David asked his sister. Maria looked at him through her pain, seeing the hurt in his young face. "Yes," she whispered. "I know you don't understand, but yes, I'm happy. But he took you. He killed our parents." Stone Bear's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "Your sister speaks truth about her happiness," he said. "But you also speak truth. I took her from her family. I caused her pain, and you pain. This is something I must live with." David stared at this Apache warrior who had just admitted to destroying his family. He had imagined this moment for 2 years, finding the man who had taken Maria, making him pay for everything he had done. But Stone Bear wasn't the monster from David's nightmares. He was just a man who loved Maria, who was terrified that she might die giving birth to his child. Another contraction hit, and Maria screamed. Stone Bear held her hand while David awkwardly tried to help, neither of them knowing much about childbirth but both desperate to do something useful. "My mother," Stone Bear said. "Mountain Flower. She knows about birthing babies, but she is with the others trying to escape the soldiers." "What about the fort?" David asked. "There's a doctor at Fort Verde." Stone Bear shook his head. "Too far, and they would not let an Apache woman into their fort." "She's not Apache," David said angrily. "She's white." "She's my sister. Look at her," Stone Bear said quietly. "Look at how she dresses, how she wears her hair, how she speaks my language. To your people, what is she now?" David looked at Maria and felt his heart break. She was wearing Apache clothing, her hair braided in an Apache style. Her skin was dark from the sun, and when she cried out in pain, half the words were in Apache. His sister had become someone he barely recognized, but she was still Maria. Still the sister who had protected him when they were children, who had read him stories and helped him when he was scared. The baby came as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold outside the cave. It was a difficult birth. Too early, too much stress from the battle. But Maria was strong, and the baby was a fighter, a daughter, Stone Bear said, his voice full of wonder as he held the tiny, perfect child. "She looks like you," he told Maria. Maria was exhausted but smiling as she took her daughter in her arms. The baby was small but healthy, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right at her mother. "What will you name her?" David asked quietly. Maria looked at her brother, then at her husband, then at the tiny person who represented everything complicated about her life. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Outside the cave, they could hear voices calling in the distance. The soldiers were looking for David, and the surviving Apache were probably looking for Stone Bear. "They will find us soon," Stone Bear said. David nodded. "Colonel Parker doesn't give up easy." The 3 adults looked at each other, each understanding that this moment, this strange peace between enemies, couldn't last much longer. "What happens now?" Maria asked. Stone Bear and David looked at each other, and something passed between them that neither could have explained. They were still enemies. David still hated Stone Bear for what he had done to their family. Stone Bear still saw David as part of the people who were trying to destroy his way of life. But they had both helped bring hope into the world. They both loved Maria more than their own lives, and that created a bond that was stronger than their hatred. "I go back to my people," Stone Bear said. "Help them find a new place to hide." a new place to live safely. And I go back to the soldiers, David said. Tell them I couldn't find any trace of my sister. Maria looked at both of them with tears in her eyes. David, I can't ask you to lie for me. You're not asking, David said. I'm choosing. He leaned down and kissed his sister's forehead, then gently touched Hope's tiny hand with one finger. Will I ever see you again?
He asked. I don't know, Maria said honestly.
But you'll always be my brother. And someday, when she's old enough, I'll tell Hope about her Uncle David, who risked everything to make sure she was born safely. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Stone Bear stood and faced the boy who could have killed him, who probably still wanted to kill him. Your sister will be safe with me, he said. I promise you this on the life of my daughter. David looked into the Apache warrior's eyes and saw something he hadn't expected to see. Honor. This man would die before he let anything happen to Maria or the baby. Take care of them, David said. Both of them. I will. As the voices outside grew closer, Stone Bear kissed Maria and Hope goodbye and slipped out of the cave into the gathering darkness. A few minutes later, David emerged and walked toward the approaching soldiers, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Mitchell! Where the hell have you been? Colonel Parker called out. Looking for tracks, sir, David replied. But the trail went cold. I don't think there were any prisoners in that village after all. Maria, listening from inside the cave, heard her brother's lie and felt her heart break with love for him. He was letting her go even though it meant losing her forever. As the soldiers rode away and quiet returned to the desert, Maria held her daughter close and thought about the impossible choice she had made. She had chosen love over blood, chosen the family she had built over the family she was born into. But in the end, maybe that wasn't the real choice at all. Maybe the real choice was between fear and understanding, between hatred and forgiveness, between seeing people as enemies or seeing them as human beings capable of love. Her daughter would grow up Apache, but she would also grow up knowing that love could cross any boundary, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that sometimes the most important battles were the ones fought not with weapons, but with the decision to see the humanity in people who were supposed to be your enemies. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars, and somewhere in that vast landscape, 3 very different people were starting new chapters of their lives, forever changed by the moment when they chose love over war.